The message arrived at 3:17 Coordinated Universal Time on a Thursday morning, 12 years after it had been transmitted. It crossed 11.8 light-years of empty space, passed through 3 automated relay stations, and finally reached the Colonial Defense Network as a compressed emergency packet containing exactly 4 bytes. There was no voice recording, no coordinates, no video, no explanation of what had happened. The system decoded the packet automatically and displayed a single word on the central screen. Help. Captain Jack Tiggs stared at it for several seconds without moving. He had spent 17 years in the Colonial Defense Service, and he had learned that distress signals were rarely simple. A distress signal could mean a broken reactor, a failed life support system, a pirate attack, a disease outbreak, or something far worse. Sometimes it meant the people sending it were still alive. Sometimes it meant they had been dead for years. Jack looked at the timestamp again. 12 years. Whatever had happened on Vera, humanity was already 12 years too late. The briefing room was nearly empty when Jack entered. 3 people were waiting for him. The first was Sergeant Dax Mercer, a heavily built weapons specialist in his early 40s, with close-cropped gray hair and the permanent expression of a man who trusted equipment more than people. He had served in 6 colonial conflicts and had survived all of them, which Jack suspected was partly because Mercer never assumed a peaceful situation would remain peaceful for long. The second was Mira Voss, 26 years old, a systems technician who had spent her entire career repairing orbital infrastructure around Earth and Mars. This would be her first deployment beyond the inner colonies. She looked nervous but was trying very hard not to show it. The third was Dr. Elion Vale, a xenobiologist who had spent 9 years studying Vera without ever setting foot on its surface. She had analyzed its atmosphere, mapped its microbial ecosystems, modeled its seasonal biology, and memorized more facts about the planet than anyone alive. Jack sat down and activated the briefing display. The message came from Haven 9, he said. Mira glanced at the screen. The colony? Yes. Mercer leaned forward. I thought Haven 9 was dead. Jack nodded. It was presumed lost 14 years ago. Dr. Vale folded her arms. Presumed? Jack looked at her. 14 years ago, Haven 9 stopped transmitting. The colony's automated supply requests stopped. Its navigation beacon disappeared. The first investigation team went in and never came back. 6 months later, a second team was sent. They transmitted for 6 hours, then every signal from their landing zone disappeared at the same time. Mira swallowed. And now the colony sent a message? 12 years ago, Jack corrected. We're only receiving it now because of the distance. Mercer looked at the single word on the screen. That's a long time to wait for help. Exactly. Jack changed the display. A holographic image of Vera appeared above the table. The planet was blue and green, wrapped in enormous silver cloud systems. Vera is almost Earth-sized. Gravity is within acceptable limits, atmospheric pressure is manageable, and the planet contains several compounds useful for long-term terraforming research. HAVEN 9 was established as a scientific colony 14 years ago. There were 312 people there when communications stopped. Vale spoke quietly. The original surveys showed nothing capable of threatening the settlement at that scale. Jack looked at her. That's why you're coming. The room became silent. Mira looked at Jack. Why us? If 2 teams already disappeared, shouldn't this be a military operation? It is. Jack pointed toward Mercer. That's why he's coming. Mercer nodded once. Jack continued, but the problem on Vera may not be military. We don't know what we're looking for, and that's why Dr. Vale is coming. Mira, you're coming because every system on Haven 9 is 12 to 14 years older than its last maintenance record. If there's anything still functioning, you're the best person we have to understand it. Mira looked uncomfortable. I've never even left the Earth-Mars corridor. Mercer glanced at her. You'll get used to it. She looked at him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No. For the first time, Jack saw the corner of Mercer's mouth move. It was supposed to be honest. Jack almost smiled. Almost. He had chosen the team carefully. None of them had the same specialty, and that was intentional. If Vera was simply a military problem, Mercer could handle it. If it was scientific, Vale could investigate it. If it was technological, Mira could understand it. Jack's job was to make sure they survived long enough to use those abilities. The journey to Vera took 22 months. Most of that time passed inside cryogenic suspension. The Resolute was a compact exploration vessel built for long-range colonial missions, not combat. It carried 4 crew members, 2 shuttlecraft, atmospheric equipment, scientific laboratories, and enough supplies to survive 6 months on the surface. It did not carry enough weapons to fight an army. Jack had specifically rejected a heavier warship. They weren't going to invade Vera. They were going to find out what happened. Before entering cryo-sleep, Jack gathered the team one final time. "Once we're down there, nobody goes anywhere alone," he said. "We don't assume the colony was attacked. We don't assume the machines, animals, environment, or whatever else we encounter are hostile. But we also don't assume they're friendly." Mercer checked his rifle. "And if something tries to kill us?" Jack looked at him. "Then you can make your professional judgment." Mira gave a nervous laugh. "That sounds reassuring." "It's the most reassuring thing you're going to hear from me," Jack replied. When Jack woke, he felt as though someone had dropped a building on his chest. The cryogenic fluid drained from his lungs while the medical system forced his body back toward consciousness. He opened his eyes to white light and the soft beeping of medical equipment. "Welcome back, Captain," Mira said. Jack turned his head. She was standing beside his cryopod, older looking somehow, although technically only 22 months had passed. "How long until orbit?" Jack asked. 43 minutes, she said. "Ship status?" "Stable. Minor damage to the outer radiator assembly, but nothing critical." Across the medical bay, Mercer was already awake and checking his equipment. Vale was still inside her cryopod. Jack slowly stood and walked toward the observation window. Vera filled the darkness beyond it. It was beautiful. Vast green continents stretched beneath white clouds, while lightning flickered inside enormous storm systems. Jack had seen thousands of planetary images during his career, but something about Vera bothered him. It looked untouched. Too untouched. Vale finally emerged from her cryopod and joined them at the window. She stared at the planet for several seconds. "Something's wrong," she said. Jack looked at her. "You recognize it?" "No." She pointed toward the night side of the planet. "Those lights." Jack followed her finger. Tiny amber points were scattered across one continent. "HAVEN 9? Mira asked. Vale shook her head. "No." Jack studied them. "Then what are they?" Vale's expression tightened. "I don't know." That answer stayed with Jack as the Resolute entered the atmosphere. They descended through thick silver clouds, turbulence shaking the shuttle hard enough to rattle the seats. Then the clouds opened. Haven 9 appeared below them. Jack expected ruins. Instead, he saw buildings. Intact habitation modules. Greenhouse domes. Communications towers. Landing platforms. Nothing appeared burned or destroyed. The colony looked abandoned, not destroyed. "Where's everyone?" Mira whispered. Jack didn't answer. The shuttle landed at 9:41 local time. The engines powered down. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Jack opened the hatch. Cold air entered the cabin carrying the smell of wet soil and minerals. They stepped onto Vera. Mercer immediately scanned the perimeter. Mira activated her environmental equipment. Vale looked around with the stunned expression of someone finally standing inside a world she had spent 9 years studying from millions of kilometers away. Jack walked toward the nearest habitation module. Its door was open. Inside, everything was still in place. A cup sat beside a sink. A jacket hung from a chair. A child's drawing was attached to a refrigerator. There were no signs of struggle. No blood. No bodies. No overturned furniture. It looked as though hundreds of people had simply stopped what they were doing and walked away. "Captain," Mira called from outside. Jack turned. She was standing near the edge of the landing field. "You should see this." Jack walked toward her. Mercer followed. On the ground were footprints. Hundreds of them. Human footprints. They began near the colony's main buildings and crossed the landing field in one continuous stream. Jack followed them with his eyes. They continued beyond the perimeter fence and disappeared toward the northern hills. Mercer crouched and examined the soil. "Fresh enough to be preserved," he said. Jack looked at him. "How fresh?" Mercer stood. "Some of these are old. Very old." He pointed toward the horizon. "But those aren't." Jack followed his finger. Far beyond the colony, something enormous moved slowly across the landscape. It was too distant to identify. It disappeared behind a ridge, then reappeared several minutes later. Jack raised his binoculars. The object moved in a perfectly straight line. It did not turn. It did not stop. It simply continued forward, clearing a path through the alien forest. Mira stared at it. What is that? Jack lowered the binoculars. We're going to find out. Vale looked from the moving structure to the human footprints leading toward it. Her voice was barely audible. Captain. Jack turned. What? She pointed toward the horizon. The footprints are going in the same direction. Jack looked again. The abandoned colony behind them was silent. Ahead of them, something enormous continued moving through the wilderness. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle. Then that's where we're going. He looked at the three people standing beside him. Stay together. The four of them began walking north, following the trail left behind by 300 missing colonists and whatever had been waiting for them on Vera. The trail led north from Haven 9 for nearly 3 kilometers before the human footprints began disappearing beneath the alien vegetation. Jack noticed the change first. The first section contained hundreds of overlapping tracks, some belonging to adults, others smaller and lighter. There were boot prints, maintenance shoes, medical footwear, and even the distinctive tread pattern of the colony's emergency response teams. Nobody had been running. Nobody had been dragged. The people had simply walked away from their homes in the same general direction. They weren't evacuating under pressure, Jack said. Mercer looked at the ground. Could have been ordered out. Then why didn't they use vehicles? Mira asked. Jack looked at the forest ahead. That's what we're trying to find out. The vegetation around them was unlike anything they had encountered near the colony. Vera's plants were enormous compared with terrestrial species, with thick green trunks and broad leaves that reflected sunlight like polished metal. Some of the smaller plants moved when the team passed, curling their leaves inward as though responding to electrical changes in the air. Vale stopped several times to collect samples, but she remained careful not to touch anything directly. The ecosystem is behaving strangely, she said. Mercer looked over his shoulder. Strangely how? The plants aren't reacting to us as organisms. They're reacting to our equipment. She held up a scanner. The electromagnetic emissions from our suits are disturbing them. Jack glanced at the forest. Is that dangerous? I don't know. Mercer sighed. You really like that answer. Vale gave him a tired look. It's an honest one. They continued for another hour before the forest abruptly ended. Jack stopped so quickly that Mira nearly walked into him. Ahead of them was a massive cleared strip of land. It stretched from the edge of the forest toward the horizon in a perfectly straight line. There were no trees, no bushes, no rocks, no animals. Nothing remained except bare dark soil. Jack raised his binoculars and slowly scanned from left to right. The corridor was several kilometers wide and extended farther than he could see. What happened here? Mira whispered. Vale stepped forward and examined the edge. On one side, the forest stood completely untouched. On the other, the ground had been stripped clean. There was no transition zone. It was almost as if someone had drawn a line across the planet and erased everything on one side. This isn't a natural event, Vale said. We know that, Jack replied. What did it? She crouched and collected a handful of soil. Whatever did this didn't burn the vegetation. It removed it. Mercer pointed toward the distant mountains. And it removed part of those too. Jack followed his finger. A mountain ridge several kilometers away had been cut through. The upper section was gone, leaving an enormous flat-sided gap through the stone. The exposed rock was smooth and almost black. Mira activated the terrain scanner. Captain, I'm detecting underground voids. Natural caves? No. She looked at the readings again. They're too regular. Jack moved closer to the edge. How deep? The nearest one is about 60 meters below us. Vale studied the corridor. The machines aren't clearing the surface randomly. They're excavating downward. Jack looked at her. How do you know? She pointed toward the distant mountains. The excavation follows a geological pattern. Mira brought up the regional survey and overlaid the original data. A network of subterranean anomalies appeared beneath the corridor. They formed a long, nearly continuous line across the continent. Jack stared at it. How far does it go? Mira zoomed out. The line continued across the entire map. At least 4,000 kilometers. Mercer gave a low whistle. That's not a mining operation. Vale shook her head. No, it's something much more deliberate. They followed the corridor for another 6 kilometers. The ground became warmer beneath their boots. Myra's scanner began producing increasingly strong electromagnetic readings. Then it started warning them of movement. Something is approaching, she said. Mercer immediately raised his rifle. Jack held up a hand. Direction? Mira pointed toward the ground. Below us, a deep vibration passed through the soil. Everyone froze. The earth cracked open 20 meters ahead of them. A circular section of ground descended silently, revealing a dark shaft. Something emerged from it. The machine was roughly the size of a small transport vehicle and moved on 6 articulated legs. Its body was covered with overlapping black plates that shifted continuously as it moved. There was no visible cockpit, head, or weapon. Thin blue lines pulsed across its surface. Mercer aimed directly at it. Permission to shoot? Jack watched the machine carefully. Wait. The machine stopped. One of its forward limbs touched the ground. A narrow beam of pale light swept across the soil. It scanned the corridor, then turned toward the mountain. It did not look at the humans. It did not react to their weapons. Instead, it began moving forward again. It passed within 30 meters of them. Mercer tracked it with his rifle. Jack watched every movement. It's ignoring us, Mira whispered. For now, Mercer replied. The machine continued along the corridor until it reached a section of exposed stone. It stopped and lowered several tools from its underside. Within seconds, the tools began cutting through the rock. The machine wasn't searching for anything. It knew exactly where to work. That's what the lights were, Vale said. Jack looked at her. What? The objects we saw from orbit. They weren't lights. They were machines operating along the excavation. Jack watched the machine disappear into the distance. Then why didn't the colony report them? Vale didn't answer. They returned to HAVEN 9 before sunset. Mira spent nearly an hour accessing the colony's engineering systems. Most of the records were corrupted, but she found something unexpected. Captain, the reactor isn't supplying the colony. Jack looked over her shoulder. Then what's powering it? I don't know. She enlarged the energy diagram. The colony's reactor is receiving power. Mercer frowned. Receiving? Mira nodded. Something is feeding energy into the reactor instead of taking it out. Jack stared at the screen. From where? Underground. Vale stepped closer. The machines? Maybe. Mira shook her head. But if they were powering the colony, why? Jack looked through the window at the silent habitation modules. Maybe they wanted the colony to keep functioning. Mercer turned toward him. For what? Jack didn't have an answer. They searched the residential blocks next. Everything was intact. Food remained inside storage cabinets. Personal equipment was still in lockers. One apartment contained a half-finished meal sitting beside a chair. Another contained a child's collection of polished stones. In the medical center, automated equipment still displayed patient schedules that were 14 years out of date. There was no evidence of violence. The people had simply disappeared. Mira stood in the center of the main corridor and looked around. 312 people don't just vanish. Jack said nothing. Captain, if they were attacked, there would be evidence. I know. If they evacuated, there would be transportation records. I know. If they died here. She stopped. Jack finished the sentence for her. There would be bodies. Mira nodded. Vale suddenly called from the laboratory. You need to see this. They found her standing beside a damaged geological scanner. She had restored part of its memory. A map appeared on the screen. It showed Vera's underground structure as it had been 14 years earlier. Beneath the colony was a massive artificial cavity. Jack stared at it. How large? Mira checked the scale. At least 80 kilometers across. Mercer looked at Vale. And the colonists knew about this? Apparently, she said. This scan was made 3 months before the colony stopped transmitting. Jack's expression hardened. Then this wasn't the beginning. Vale shook her head. No. Something happened after they found it. Jack looked toward the darkened window. Beyond the colony, the distant machines continued moving through the wilderness. We need their records. Mira searched the archive systems again. Most of the colony's scientific data was deleted. Jack frowned. Deleted? Not corrupted. Deliberately removed. She searched deeper. Wait, there's one surviving directory. A file appeared on the screen. It had been hidden inside the environmental control network. The timestamp was 11 years old. The author was Dr. Sarah Klein, Haven 9's original director. Jack opened it. Klein appeared on the screen, exhausted and frightened. She looked directly into the camera and spoke slowly. If you're watching this, then the colony has already gone silent. Do not send another team. We made a mistake. We thought they were machines built to extract resources. We were wrong. The recording flickered. Klein looked over her shoulder before continuing. They're following something beneath the planet. We don't know what it is yet. But whatever they're doing, they're not trying to kill us. She paused. They're building something. The screen went black. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Mercer finally lowered his weapon. Building what? Vale stared at the blank screen. That's what we need to find out. Then Mira looked toward the window. Her face changed. Captain. Jack turned. What? She pointed outside. The machines on the distant corridor had stopped moving. All of them. Hundreds of them stood perfectly still. Then, one by one, they turned in the same direction. Toward HFY 9. Jack slowly reached for his rifle. Everyone inside, he said. Mercer was already moving. Mira shut down the terminal. Vale grabbed the archive drive. Jack watched the machines across the horizon. For 14 years, they had ignored the colony. Now they were looking directly at it. And beneath their feet, something deep underground began to wake. The first impact came less than 2 minutes after the machines turned toward HFY 9. It wasn't an explosion. It was a vibration that passed through the colony's foundations and made every window tremble. Jack stood inside the main operations building with his rifle ready while Mira monitored the external cameras. Outside, the machines had begun moving again. They weren't charging the colony. They were approaching in a slow, organized formation. How many? Jack asked. Mira stared at the sensor display. 27 visible. More are coming from underground. Mercer checked the ammunition magazine in his rifle. Do they know we're here? Vale answered before Mira could. They definitely know. Jack looked at her. How can you be sure? She pointed toward the ceiling. Because the colony's electromagnetic systems just change. Something has connected to them. Mira looked up sharply. She's right. I'm seeing a new signal inside the network. Jack frowned. Can you block it? Mira hesitated. I can try. Try. Mira moved to the colony's central terminal and began working through the old systems. The network was badly degraded, but some parts were responding to her commands. She isolated the communications grid and shut down the external antennas. One by one, the colony's systems went offline. The lights flickered. The building fell silent. Outside, the machines stopped again. Jack waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing happened. Mercer lowered his rifle slightly. Maybe that worked. Then the ground beneath the operations building groaned. A crack appeared across the floor. Mira jumped backward. No, she whispered. The crack widened. Something had detected them through the ground. Jack shouted, move. The team ran as a section of flooring collapsed behind them. A black mechanical limb emerged from beneath the building, followed by another. The machine was smaller than the surface units but faster. Mercer fired. 3 rounds struck its armor. The machine recoiled but continued climbing. Mercer fired again. This time one of its legs shattered. It collapsed sideways. Jack stared at it. They can be damaged. Mercer nodded. Very reassuring. Mira looked at the broken machine. Wait. She crouched beside it. Don't destroy it. Mercer stared at her. It's trying to crawl through the floor. I know. And you're asking me not to shoot it? Yes. Why? Mira pointed toward the machine's damaged body. Beneath the armor, something was glowing. Because that isn't a power core. Vale knelt beside her. What is it? Mira scanned the device. A relay. She looked at Jack. This machine isn't here to attack us. It's connecting the colony to the underground network. Jack looked at the machine, then at the floor. Why would they need the colony? Mira shook her head. I don't know yet. Vale suddenly turned toward the old laboratory. The archive. Jack followed her gaze. What about it? Klein said they discovered something. If the machines are accessing the colony network, they may have been doing it for years. Mira understood immediately. The deleted files. Jack looked at her. Can you recover them? If the deletion wasn't physical, then do it. Mira grabbed her equipment. I need the original server. They moved deeper into the colony while Mercer remained near the damaged machine, watching the corridors. The original server was hidden beneath the geological laboratory. Mira found the access panel behind a storage cabinet. When she opened it, a narrow shaft descended into darkness. That's not on the colony blueprint, she said. Jack looked down. Then we're going in. The shaft led to an underground maintenance chamber. Old cables covered the walls. Some were human, others were not. Alien conduits had been attached to the colony's infrastructure, blending with the human systems so perfectly that they had been mistaken for damaged equipment. Vale ran her scanner over one of them. These were here before the colony. Jack looked at her. How old? At least several centuries. Mira examined the connection. Maybe much older. They followed the cables until they reached a sealed door. A faded human warning was painted across it. Authorized personnel only. Beneath it, someone had written another message by hand. Don't open this again. Jack looked at Vale. Who wrote that? She checked the handwriting against the colony records. Sarah Klein. Jack placed his hand on the door control. Then she probably had a reason. Mercer looked toward the tunnel behind them. And something tells me we don't have time to respect it. Jack opened the door. Inside was a small archive chamber filled with storage units. Most were dead. One remained active. Mira connected her tablet. Thousands of files appeared. She searched by date. The earliest records were 14 years old. The first entries were ordinary scientific reports. Weather measurements, soil chemistry, biological samples. Then the tone changed. The recordings became shorter and more urgent. The first major discovery had been made 3 months after the colony's establishment. A drilling team had detected an artificial cavity beneath the continent. The colonists initially believed it was a natural formation, but the geometry was too precise. They drilled deeper. The drill broke through into a massive chamber. The recording showed a dark space filled with metallic structures. Dr. Klein's younger voice could be heard explaining what they had found. The structure appears inactive. We have detected no energy source, no radiation, and no biological activity. The walls contain repeated geometric patterns. We believe this may be an ancient installation. The next recording was made 2 weeks later. Klein looked frightened. The installation is not inactive. The image shook. We removed a small section of material for analysis. 6 hours later, 3 machines appeared at the excavation site. The recording ended abruptly. The next file showed the machines working. They were different from the ones Jack had seen on the surface, but the design was unmistakably related. The colonists had tried to communicate using radio pulses, light patterns, and mathematical sequences. Nothing worked. They had then destroyed one machine. The recording showed the result. A heavy mining vehicle crushed the machine beneath its tracks. The machine stopped moving. The colonists celebrated. 2 days later, 3 identical machines emerged from the ground. Vale watched silently. They weren't replacing it. Jack looked at her. What do you mean? The system didn't send another machine. It built new ones. Mira studied the data, using local material. Jack's expression hardened. So every time the colonists destroyed one, they taught the system how to build another. Mira finished. The recordings continued. The machines began expanding the corridor. At first they moved around the colony. Then they began excavating closer. The colonists built barriers. The machines stopped. They built another barrier. The machines changed direction. The pattern continued for months. It became clear that the machines were not trying to eliminate the humans. They were following a predetermined route beneath the continent. The colony happened to be in the way. Then came the recording that changed everything. Klein appeared on the screen with a map behind her. We have finally identified the pattern. The machines aren't searching for minerals. They're exposing a geological layer that forms a continuous structure around the planet. She pointed to the map. The excavation is part of a construction sequence. Jack leaned closer. Klein continued. We don't know what they're building yet, but we have confirmed that the final structure will be located beneath the northern continent. Mira stopped the recording. That's where we're standing. Vale shook her head. No, the northern continent is 2,000 kilometers from here. Mira brought up the excavation map. Not anymore. She connected the data from the surface corridor. A line extended across the continent and ended at a point beneath a mountain range. Jack stared at it. How far from the colony? About 300 kilometers. Mercer looked at the map. So we go there? Jack shook his head. Not yet. Mercer frowned. Why? Jack pointed toward the archive. Because we're missing something. He reopened Klein's final records. The last complete file had been made 11 years earlier. The title was simply, If They Find US. Jack opened it. Klein appeared on the screen. She was visibly injured, breathing heavily. If anyone receives this, understand one thing. We were wrong about the machines. They aren't invading us. They aren't harvesting us. They aren't even trying to remove us. She looked towards something outside the frame. They're avoiding us. Jack's eyes narrowed. Klein continued. We've spent 11 months watching their behavior. Every time humans interfere, they alter their route. Every time we leave them alone, they continue toward the same destination. She paused. That means the machines don't care about us. A long silence followed. But something beneath this planet does. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Then a deep sound rolled through the underground chamber. Mira looked at her scanner. "Captain." Jack turned. "What now?" She raised the device. The structure beneath the continent just activated. Vale stared at the readings. "How long has it been active?" Myra's face went pale. "According to this." She looked at Jack. "It started 14 years ago." Jack understood. The machines had not awakened when the colonists drilled into the planet. They had been working long before humanity arrived. The colony had not discovered the operation. It had merely walked into its path. And somewhere beneath Vera, something enormous had just begun the next stage. The vibration continued for almost 3 minutes before it finally stopped. Jack, Mercer, Mira, and Vale remained inside the underground archive, listening to the silence that followed. Nothing moved. Nothing exploded. Yet every instrument in Myra's hands showed the same thing. Energy was flowing through the ancient network beneath Vera. "How much energy?" Jack asked. Mira stared at the readings. "I don't have a useful comparison." Mercer looked at her. "Try anyway." She hesitated. "Enough to power Haven 9 for several thousand years." Mercer slowly lowered his rifle. "That's not a useful comparison. I warned you." Jack looked at the map displayed on the wall. The excavation corridor stretched across the continent toward the northern mountains. "The structure activated 14 years ago," he said. "Then why hasn't anything happened until now?" Vale studied the geological data. "Maybe something has happened. We just haven't recognized it." Jack turned toward her. "Explain." She pointed toward the readings. "The machines have been removing specific layers of rock. If the system needed to reach something beneath the planet, then the excavation wasn't the event. It was preparation." Mira brought up the geological model and began comparing it with the machine activity. "They're following a layer about 400 meters below the original surface." Jack frowned. "Why that layer?" "I don't know." Vale moved closer. "Because it's not simply rock." She enlarged the chemical composition. The layer contained unusual mineral structures that existed nowhere else on Vera. The crystals formed microscopic patterns that repeated across the continent. "This is artificial," she said. "Or at least modified." Mercer looked at the screen. "You're saying someone changed the planet?" Vale shook her head. "Not recently. These formations are ancient. Millions of years old, perhaps older." Jack stared at the map. "Then the machines aren't building something from scratch." "No," Vale said. "They're uncovering something that was already here." The team decided to leave the colony before the machines returned. They packed the archive drives, emergency equipment, and enough supplies for 10 days. Their original plan had been to investigate the colony and determine what happened to the settlers. That mission had changed. Now they needed to understand the excavation before the machines completed whatever they were preparing. Jack chose the northern mountain range as their next destination. The route would take them through the cleared corridor, which made travel easier but also left them exposed. They traveled at night, when Vera's surface temperature dropped and the machines entered their maintenance cycle. Jack had learned that much from watching them. For approximately 3 hours every night, most of the machines stopped moving. Some remained active, but their activity was limited to communications and repair. "They're not resting," Mira said while studying the sensor data. "They're synchronizing." Jack looked at her. "With what?" "The underground network." She paused. "I think every machine on this continent is part of one system." 3 nights into the journey, they found the first evidence that the colonists had survived longer than expected. It was a small underground shelter beneath the remains of an old research station. The door had been sealed from the outside, but the interior still contained emergency supplies. Vale found handwritten notes on the wall. The last entry was dated 11 years earlier. "We have moved north," she read aloud. "The machines are clearing the southern corridor. We believe they will eventually reach the central structure. We cannot stop them. If anyone finds this shelter, follow the excavation. The answer is beneath the mountain." Mira looked at Jack. They knew where it was going. "And they were trying to get there first," Jack replied. Mercer examined the shelter. "Then where are they now?" Nobody answered. The following morning, the team encountered a machine convoy. There were 32 units moving along the corridor. Unlike the smaller machines near Haven 9, these were enormous. Each one carried a rotating structure capable of cutting through solid rock. Jack ordered the team into cover. They watched from behind a ridge as the convoy approached. "They don't look like soldiers," Mercer whispered. "Because they're not," Vale replied. "They're construction equipment." One of the machines stopped. Its body rotated toward their position. Jack immediately raised his rifle. Everybody stay still. The machine scanned the ridge for several seconds. Then it continued moving. Mira slowly lowered her scanner. It detected us. Jack nodded. Yes. Then why didn't it attack? Vale answered quietly. Because we aren't part of its objective. Jack watched the convoy disappear. That may be the most dangerous thing we've learned. They reached the mountain on the 6th day. The excavation entered it through a massive artificial tunnel. Jack sent a drone inside first. The drone traveled nearly 2 kilometers before its signal became unstable. Then the video returned. A gigantic chamber appeared on the screen. Its walls were covered in smooth black material. Thousands of machines moved along the floor. At the center was a circular structure more than 3 kilometers wide. Mira stared at the image. That's impossible. Mercer looked at her. You keep saying that too. She ignored him. The energy readings are coming from the ring. Vale stepped closer. It's not a ring. She zoomed in. The interior contained dozens of massive structures suspended above the floor. It's a transmitter. Jack looked at the machine activity around it. Transmitter for what? Mira checked the signal patterns. I don't know yet. The drone suddenly lost altitude. Something had struck it. The image shook violently before recovering. A machine had approached. It did not destroy the drone. Instead, it touched the device with a thin mechanical limb. The screen filled with symbols. Then the drone's camera turned toward the massive structure. A beam of light appeared above the ring. Jack watched as a 3-dimensional star map formed in the chamber. Thousands of stars appeared. Several were highlighted. Mira stared at the map. Those are colonies. Jack looked at her. Human colonies? She nodded. Most of them. Mercer tightened his grip on his weapon. Why would an alien machine know where our colonies are? Vale answered before Mira could. Because it has been listening. The drone's signal suddenly became clear again. The star map changed. One point appeared in the center. Earth. Then the machine displayed a second point far beyond human territory. A line connected them. Myra's eyes widened. It's not showing a route. Jack looked at her. Then what is it? A transmission path. The chamber's energy levels increased. The ring began glowing with pale blue light. Vale examined the readings. It's preparing to send something. Jack asked, can we stop it? Mira shook her head. Not from here. Mercer looked toward the tunnel. Then we go inside. Jack hesitated. He knew entering that chamber would be dangerous. But they had already traveled thousands of kilometers across a hostile planet to reach it. Turning back now would leave them with nothing. They entered the chamber just before the machines began their next construction cycle. Their suits immediately registered electromagnetic interference. The air felt charged. Every hair on Jack's arms rose beneath his uniform. Thousands of machines moved around the chamber, but none attacked. They simply continued working. Jack looked toward the central structure. Why are they letting us walk in? Vale shook her head. They're not letting us. They don't care. Mira connected her scanner to one of the interface nodes. A stream of information flooded her display. Captain. Jack turned. What? This isn't a communication system. She swallowed. It's an activation system. Vale's expression changed. Activation for what? Mira looked at the enormous ring. Something outside this planet. A deep tone filled the chamber. Every machine stopped. The ring began to rotate. Jack stared upward as the entire structure came alive. Myra's scanner screamed with warnings. Captain, she said, the activation sequence has started. Jack looked at the timer appearing on her display. How long? Myra's face went pale. 14 days. Mercer raised his weapon. Until what? Mira looked at the star map. I don't know. Then one more point appeared. It was not a star. It was moving, and it was coming toward Vera. For several seconds, nobody moved. The enormous ring continued rotating above them, each section sliding into place with mechanical precision. Pale blue light traveled around its circumference and disappeared into the darkness overhead. On Myra's display, the unknown object continued moving toward Vera. Its projected trajectory was frighteningly precise. How fast? Jack asked. Myra's fingers moved across the scanner. I don't know what it is, so I can't calculate its exact velocity. Give me the best estimate you have. She swallowed. If the projection is correct, it will reach Vera in 13 days. Mercer looked toward the massive structure. And the machine system activates in 14. Vale stared at the approaching point. Then the timing isn't a coincidence. Jack nodded. No, it's not. They retreated from the chamber before the machines resumed their work. Nobody attacked them. That was almost worse. Jack had expected resistance. Instead, the ancient construction system continued operating as if 4 humans walking through its central facility were no more important than dust on the floor. Once they reached the tunnel, Jack stopped. "We need to understand what we're dealing with before we touch anything." Mira looked at him. "We already know enough." Jack shook his head. "No. We know there's a transmitter. We know it's preparing something. We know something is coming. We don't know what the transmitter does if we interfere." Vale looked toward the chamber. "And we don't know whether stopping it would actually save us." Mercer frowned. "How could stopping an alien system be worse than letting it finish?" Vale answered quietly, "Because we don't know what it's stopping." That question changed their approach. Instead of immediately trying to destroy the transmitter, they began studying it. Mira spent hours analyzing the signals captured by the drone. The system communicated in layers. The first layer contained planetary coordinates. The second contained timing information. The third appeared to be a confirmation protocol. The fourth was locked behind a biological interface. "Biological?" Jack asked. Mira nodded. "The system requires something living to complete the final authorization." Mercer looked at Vale. "That's your department." Vale shook her head. "Not necessarily. It may not recognize species. It may recognize biological complexity." Mira looked at the interface. "Or a neural pattern." Jack stared at the screen. "Could a human activate it?" "Possibly." "Could a human shut it down?" Mira hesitated. "Possibly." Mercer sighed. "You two need a new vocabulary." They returned to the chamber during the machine maintenance cycle. This time, Mira carried a portable interface designed to translate electrical signals without directly connecting to the alien system. Jack insisted that nobody approach the central structure until they understood the security network. Mercer positioned himself near the entrance with enough ammunition to hold the tunnel for several minutes, but he knew that if the entire machine network attacked, ammunition would only buy time. Vale studied the symbols projected around the ring. "These aren't instructions," she said. Jack looked at her. "What are they?" "Warnings." Mira glanced over. "Warnings about what?" Vale pointed toward the star map. "The highlighted systems." She enlarged one. "Look at the pattern." Mira compared it with the others. Her eyes widened. "They're all planets with intelligent life." Vale nodded. "But not all of them are inhabited anymore." Jack stepped closer. "How do you know?" Vale pointed to another symbol beside each world. "This indicates biological activity. This one indicates technological activity." She moved to a third symbol. "And this means the system is silent." Mercer looked at the display. "How many silent worlds?" Mira counted. "Hundreds." Nobody spoke. Jack stared at the map. "What happened to them?" Vale shook her head. "We don't know." Mira continued analyzing. Then she found something buried in the data. "Captain, there's a historical sequence." "Show me." The map changed. The highlighted worlds appeared in chronological order. One by one, they went dark. The process had been happening for thousands of years. The machines on Vera were not the first. They were part of an ancient network operating across multiple star systems. "This isn't an invasion system," Mira whispered. "It's a warning network." Jack looked at her. "Warning us about what?" Mira pointed toward the approaching object. "Whatever is coming." Vale's expression tightened. "Then destroying the transmitter could remove the warning." Jack looked back at the ring. "Or remove the defense." Nobody could answer that. They spent the next 2 days trying to determine the purpose of the activation. Mira discovered that the system was not opening a conventional portal. It was preparing a massive signal. The unknown object approaching Vera wasn't a ship, at least not according to the sensors. It was something much larger and slower. "It's generating gravitational distortion," Mira explained. "A ship wouldn't do that." Mercer looked at her. "Then what is it?" "I don't know." Jack frowned. "You have to stop saying that." Mira looked up. "Captain, I'm trying to identify something that doesn't fit any technology humanity has ever encountered." "I'm doing my best." Jack softened. "I know." She returned to the console. "Then let me finish." On the third day, the machines finally reacted to their investigation. The lights around the chamber turned red. Every machine stopped simultaneously. Mercer raised his rifle. "Here we go." Jack looked at the network. "Don't fire unless they attack." Hundreds of machines turned toward them. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then one machine moved forward and placed a small device on the floor. It emitted a holographic projection. A planet appeared. Then another. Then another. Each one was surrounded by a rapidly expanding red field. Vale studied the symbols. They're showing us something. Mira translated the basic pattern. Danger. The projection change. A star system appeared, followed by a massive wave spreading through it. Everything within the wave disappeared from the display. Mercer stared. Is that what happened to those worlds? Vale nodded slowly. I think so. The machine then displayed Vera. A red line extended toward the approaching object. Then it displayed Earth. Another line appeared. Jack understood. The transmitter isn't calling it here. Mira shook her head. No. It's telling the network where the danger is. Vale looked at the machines. And the network has been trying to warn civilizations for thousands of years. Jack's expression hardened. Then why did it need the colonists? Mira looked at the biological interface. Because the final warning requires a living observer. Jack looked at the empty archive chamber in his memory. The colonists weren't prisoners. Vale shook her head. No, they were witnesses. Yes. A sudden explosion shook the chamber. Mercer was thrown against the wall. Contact, he shouted. The machines outside had begun moving. Dozens entered the tunnel. Then hundreds. Jack grabbed Myra's arm. How long until the activation? 9 days. Can we redirect the signal? Mira looked at the interface. Maybe. Can we shut it down? No. Can we alter the destination? She stared at the controls. Possibly. Mercer fired into the tunnel. The first machine collapsed. Another climbed over it. Whatever you're going to do, he shouted, do it now. Jack looked at Mira. What's the risk? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, if I change the destination and I'm wrong, we could erase the warning network completely. Vale looked at the approaching machines. And if you do nothing? Mira looked at the star map. We wait for whatever is coming. Jack made his decision. Change the destination. Mira stared at him. Captain, you don't know what that will do. No. He looked toward Mercer, who was firing continuously now. But I know what doing nothing will do. Mira connected the interface. The system immediately rejected her. She tried again. Rejected. Again. Rejected. Then the machines entered the chamber. Mercer shouted, Jack. Jack drew his pistol and joined the fight. Myra's hands trembled over the controls. Vale stood beside her. Look at the biological sequence, Vale said. Mira glanced at her. What? The system isn't asking for a command. Then what is it asking for? Vale pointed toward the display. A choice. Mira stared at the symbols. The interface presented two possible pathways. One continued the activation. The other redirected the signal. She understood. The ancient system had never been designed to force a civilization to obey. It had been designed to let one make a decision. Mira looked at Jack. Captain. Jack fired again. What? I found the control. He looked at her. Can you use it? Mira stared at the approaching machines. Yes. Then do it. She placed her hand against the interface. The entire chamber went silent. The ring stopped rotating. The approaching object on the star map disappeared. Then every machine in the chamber turned toward Mira. She pressed the final command. The transmitter activated. And somewhere beyond Vera, something answered. For 3 seconds after Mira pressed the command, nothing happened. The enormous chamber was completely silent. The machines had stopped moving. The ring above them had stopped rotating, suspended in a field of pale blue light. Even the electromagnetic interference that had filled the air disappeared. Jack stood with his pistol raised, waiting for something to happen. Mercer was breathing heavily beside him, one hand pressed against the blood soaking through his armor. Vale stared at the ring. Mira remained connected to the interface, her hand trembling against the alien surface. Did it work? Jack asked. Mira didn't answer. Mira? She looked at the display. I don't know. Then the chamber shook violently. The ring began rotating again, but this time it moved in the opposite direction. The star map above it changed. The approaching object that had been moving toward Vera disappeared from the display. In its place, a vast field of distorted space appeared. Thousands of points of light emerged around it. Mira stared in disbelief. Those aren't stars. Jack looked at her. Then what are they? Signals. She enlarged the display. Each point represented a transmission traveling through space. Some were ancient. Some were recent. All were converging on the same region. Vale stepped closer. The warning network. Mira nodded. It's waking up. Mercer looked toward the machines. Are they attacking? Jack scanned the chamber. No. Every machine had lowered its mechanical limbs. None were moving toward them. Instead, they were facing the ring. It was almost as though they were waiting for an answer. The answer came from the planet itself. A deep vibration traveled through the chamber, followed by a sound so low that Jack felt it in his chest rather than heard it with his ears. Cracks appeared across the floor. Several machines fell into the gaps. Mira disconnected herself from the interface. "We have to leave." Jack didn't argue. "Everyone move." Mercer tried to follow but stumbled. Jack caught him. "You're injured." Mercer looked down at the blood covering his armor. "I've noticed. Can you walk?" "I can complain and walk at the same time." Jack helped him toward the tunnel. Vale grabbed the archive drive and followed. Behind them, the ring continued generating energy. The chamber began collapsing in sections, but the machines did not flee. They remained at their stations, continuing their work as if the destruction around them meant nothing. They reached the mountain tunnel just as the first section collapsed. Jack pushed Mira through the opening and turned back for Mercer. "Come on." Mercer fired 2 rounds into a machine blocking the passage. The first round bounced off its armor. The second struck a damaged joint. The machine collapsed. Mercer leaned against the wall. That was the last of the good ammunition. Jack grabbed his arm. "Then we're done shooting." "Good." Mercer managed a weak smile. "I was getting tired." They ran. Behind them, the tunnel shook harder. A massive section of rock collapsed, sealing the chamber. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the vibration stopped. Mira checked her equipment. "The signal is still transmitting." Jack looked at her. "From underground?" "Yes." Vale shook her head. "Then the transmitter survived." Mira stared at the readings. "It did more than survive." She turned the screen toward Jack. "The destination change." Jack studied the new coordinates. They were no longer pointing toward Earth. They weren't pointing toward any human colony. The signal was traveling toward the region of space from which the unknown object had been approaching. "What happens now?" Jack asked. Mira shook her head. "I don't know." Vale looked at the map. "Maybe we don't need to know." Jack looked at her. "That's not very scientific." "I'm a scientist, Captain. I know when the available evidence has reached its limit." She pointed at the display. "Whatever the machines were preparing for has received the signal. The question is whether it understands it." The ground shook again. This time the vibration was weaker. Then it stopped completely. They spent the next 6 hours returning to the extraction point. The journey was slow because of Mercer's injury. Jack wanted to stop and treat him properly, but Mercer refused until they reached the shuttle. "If I sit down now," he said, "I'm not getting back up." Mira looked at him. "That's medically irresponsible." Mercer glanced at her. "You've known me for 3 weeks. You haven't earned the right to criticize my medical decisions. I've read your medical file. Then you know I'm consistently irresponsible." Jack almost laughed. It was the first time since arriving on Vera that the team felt like 4 people instead of 4 survivors. The shuttle lifted off just before dawn. From orbit, Vera looked peaceful again. The continent below was covered by enormous forests, silver oceans, and endless storm systems. But the excavation corridor was impossible to miss. It stretched across the land like a scar. Jack watched it through the observation window. "How many machines are still active?" he asked. Mira checked the orbital sensors. "Thousands." "And the transmitter?" "Still active." Vale joined them. "But the construction has stopped." Jack turned. "You're sure?" She nodded. "The machines aren't excavating anymore." Mira checked the data. "She's right. The energy consumption is dropping." Jack stared at the planet. "Then we didn't stop them." Vale shook her head. "No. We changed what they were doing." The Resolute departed Vera 6 hours later. They had no idea whether the unknown object had changed course. They had no way to confirm whether the warning signal had worked. Their only evidence was the sudden silence from the alien system. The journey home lasted another 22 months. Mercer spent the first 6 weeks in medical suspension. Mira worked almost continuously, trying to reconstruct the alien interface from the data she had captured. Vale began writing a scientific report that she eventually deleted after realizing there was no language adequate to describe what they had witnessed. Jack spent most of his time reviewing the mission recordings. He watched the colony again and again. 312 people had lived there. 312 people had discovered something humanity wasn't prepared to understand. And when they realized nobody could arrive in time to save them, they had left behind one final word. Help. Earth received the Resolute without ceremony. The official report described the mission as an investigation into a failed colony with unknown environmental and technological causes. The details of the underground network were classified. The existence of the alien warning system was known only to a handful of officials and scientists. Jack returned to active duty. Mercer retired 6 months later. Mira was offered positions at 3 major research institutions and refused all of them. Vale continued studying the recovered data. For 11 years, nothing happened. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Earth detected a signal from Vera. Jack was 62 when the call came. He arrived at the communications center and found Mira already standing in front of the main display. She looked older than she had on Vera, but her eyes were exactly the same. "How long has the signal been active?" Jack asked. 4 seconds. "Message? Not yet." Jack looked at the display. "Then what is it?" Mira pointed toward the astronomical data. "It's a coordinate." Jack stared at it. "Where?" "The same region where we redirected the activation signal." Vale entered the room behind them. She had spent 11 years studying the recovered network. She looked at the coordinate and immediately understood. Something answered. The room went silent. Then another transmission arrived. This one came from Vera. Mira decoded it. 4 symbols appeared on the screen. She stared at them for several seconds. Jack asked, "What does it say?" Mira looked at him. "It means thank you." Jack's expression changed. "Who sent it?" Mira shook her head. "I don't know." Vale stepped closer. "Wait." A new signal appeared. Then another. Then thousands. The display filled with points of light. Mira began processing them. Jack watched her face. "What are you seeing?" She zoomed out. The points were coming from across the galaxy. Every one of them was transmitting the same warning network. Mira whispered, "They're all active." Jack looked at Vale. "Why now?" Vale stared at the map. "Because someone answered the warning." "Who?" She pointed toward the outer edge of the display. A region of space had gone completely dark. Not empty. Dark. The stars behind it were disappearing one by one. Myra's voice trembled. "The object we detected 11 years ago wasn't coming toward Vera." Jack looked at her. "Then where was it going?" She enlarged the map. The trajectory appeared. It passed through Vera, then through the outer colonies, then continued inward, straight toward Earth. Jack stared at the line. "How long?" Mira swallowed. "It changed course when we redirected the signal." "How long?" She looked at the final calculation. 26 days. Nobody spoke. Then the communication system produced one final transmission from Vera. Mira decoded it. The screen displayed 4 words. "You have been warned." Jack looked through the window at Earth below. For 14 years, humanity had believed the colony on Vera had disappeared because something had attacked it. They had been wrong. The colonists had not died trying to defeat the machines. They had died trying to understand them. The machines had never been the enemy. They had been building a warning system. And 12 years after humanity received the first desperate message, humanity finally understood what it had meant. Help had never been a request for rescue. It had been a warning. And now, for the first time, humanity knew what the colonists had been afraid of. Something was coming, and this time, Earth had 26 days to prepare.